Alright, I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to try doing a video lecture. Um, I'll post this. You can watch it at your leisure, and then we'll discuss it in class during the live session. So this is part one for class 4. Model sheets. We talked about model sheets last week, and I had you all work on your own model sheets. I think most of you were very successful. A couple of you struggled a little bit, but I think eventually you pretty much came around. I think everybody gets the importance of the model sheet. But I got an email from one of you, and the question was, talking about model sheets, I know they're a good idea, but I have to ask, honestly, do you really use them? And if so, can we see an example of yours? And the answer to that is yes, I really do. Here's a model sheet. Now you can see with this particular character, he's somewhat complex in his design. I would not be able to draw him over and over again without a model sheet. So a model sheet really does pay for itself in terms of the investment that you make. With model sheets, sometimes I have a variety of designs that I'll go through. So here's an example of Dexter. I talked about him last week. And he goes through evolutionary stages. Now that can mean that I didn't like it, or the person I'm working with didn't like it. In this particular case, it was my personal choice. I felt he was too cartoonish in the first 2 takes. I don't like the idea of the Revenge of the Nerds style that some of these have. And I ended up going with the final one, the one on the bottom. So that's the final design for Dexter. And the way I work with model sheets is if it has revisions, I'll make note of revisions. That's why it's also important to date the model sheet, because you can see what's your latest version, what's the latest take that you're offering in terms of what we're looking at. So that can be really helpful. But now I'll take this model sheet and I'll print it out on 8.5 by 11 paper, and I'll put it in a binder, which I'll use, and as I'm drawing the book, I'll refer to Dexter's model sheet, and it'll really help me to make him look consistent throughout the story. Okay, so model sheets, yes, very important. All right, so this week's class is about panel to panel, showing action in the narrative. And what that means is it's the ability to demonstrate an effect of moving from panel to panel and how those transitions affect your story. When to use which method and why. And we kind of briefly touched, if you watched the video I put up earlier in the week, on thumbnails. And thumbnails are really important. Thumbnails are just small layouts of your pages before you commit to a full-size page. We're going to kind of gloss over thumbnails and we'll go back to them. So let's look at a complex fight scene by Bruce Timm. I would say this one is about as complex as it can get. If you take a look at it, give you a second. All right, in looking at it, it's very straightforward, even though there's a lot going on. There's no backgrounds whatsoever. So Timm wants you to focus on the action here. He doesn't want you to get sidetracked with the location or where they are, etc. And it's also quick cuts. The same size panels used, with the exception of the first one, are to show that the action is basically one after the other. And if you notice, it's subtle, but it's done, that the characters, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, stay either stage left or stage right. So if the Joker is on the left of the panel and Batman's on the right, they stay that way through the entire sequence. And that's important when you have a complex action scene like this. And it's also nice to note that for most of this, a fairly violent fight scene, it's action, 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 and then when the Joker pulls the knife and we get the sound effect snick, we'd assume that's some kind of switchblade or something, that gives us a pause. And pause is important because pause helps us to kind of take a breath while we're in the middle of an action. If you picture it like a movie, it adds a tremendous amount of style and atmosphere to the storytelling. So that pause is really effective. We get the evil look on the Joker's face, his bloodied lip. He means business as he comes at Batman with that knife. Panel-to-panel transitions are really important to get right, and in this case they look like they flow into each other. So each move, each action relates to the next, and I think that's really important. I really like the sound effects. Tim's a big fan of the old Adam West Batman show, so I think he used a lot of that in this. But it's a nicely designed page of action. All right, let's take a look at Frank Miller. This is from Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, which is regarded by many as a classic. Now, in this, you can see that pacing is the key here. Pacing is when to show what and for how long. So if you look at this sequence, if we start at this panel and we go across, we see Bruce Wayne. He's contemplative in a dark area. Now, knowing the Batman mythos, we would assume this is probably the Batcave. The word balloon up in the top and going off panel, in the script they would call that VO, voice off screen, refers to Alfred, who is up the flight of stairs. We see that revealed in the next panel. It's really important the way this is done, and it's really subtle, but it's done very, very well. So Bruce Wayne's face in shadow, the full black area, he's in a dark, moody place. The next panel, we see a flight of stairs, again, very shadowy, and it's important to see the full figure of Alfred with his cane in an area coming out of light, because we need to establish where and what is going on with these actions. If it was instantly to this, we eliminated this panel here and we went from this one to this one, we wouldn't really know what's going on. We'd be lost. So this panel is so key to making sure the reader gets that Bruce Wayne's gotten up in the middle of the night. Alfred has come down to the cave to see what he's doing, and it's complemented by the dialogue, which says, you know, you got to start sleeping in your bed. You can't be wandering around. Hardly the hour for antiques, is it? And that's a great bit of narrative because it flows into what Bruce Wayne's been looking at, which is the Robin costume in some kind of display case. If you've not read the story, I'm not giving away any spoilers. It's revealed in the first few pages that something bad happened to Robin, and that's why Bruce Wayne gave up being Batman. So that's what he's doing in the middle of the night. Something has called him down to the Batcave. But look at the pacing here. So we've got Bruce contemplative, we've got Alfred, an old friend, coming in saying, you know, basically this has got to stop, you know, this night wandering. These two shots, very, very similar. Might even be a photostat. One clue we can look for is like the hatch marks here at the top of the head. Looks very similar here. So I'd take a wild guess. You've got two blips there, two blips there, the white dot there, white dot there. I'd take a wild guess and say this is probably a photostat repeated. Now why do that? Why not have the one panel? Well, it's because when we break it into two panels, we give this dialogue a beat. So he delivers this line of dialogue, or these two lines of dialogue. There's a hesitation, and then another bit of dialogue. Now you could have put that down here as a creator, but this gives it even further pause. And I think that's important for the dramatic impact of the next panel, because as a reader, we don't know why Bruce is down here in the Batcave in the middle of the night. Bruce goes walking up the stairs. He's pretty nonchalant about the whole thing. And then as he's revealed in the light for the first time, we realize, as does Alfred, that Bruce has shaved his mustache. Now, most of you are probably saying, well, Bruce Wayne doesn't have a mustache. In this story, at the beginning, he does. And that's important to the story because, as we all know, Batman can't jump around with a mustache. He'd kind of look silly with that mask. And by this expression and this reaction from Bruce, you can see that he didn't even realize that for some reason he shaved his mustache. And that plays to the way the story builds. This is a tremendous example of pacing. There's a lot of information in just 8 panels. We get the idea that Bruce is not happy in his retirement. We get the idea that Alfred is concerned. We get the idea that something bad happened to Robin. And we know something's coming, like a brewing storm, because Bruce Wayne, without even realizing it, shaved his mustache, right? So we go into the next sequence, which follows that one. Miller uses a technique that a lot of creators use and a lot of creators don't use well, and that's the characters talking on TV. We have a shot of this balding guy, and he's looking a little bit contemplative of himself, maybe a little bit sad, and he says, "For me, this is the end of a long nightmare and the first step on the long road to absolution." Well, this is actually Harvey Dent, the former villain known as Two-Face, and he's had plastic surgery to have his face restored, and that's what this whole first story is about. And then we go to the news anchor, and we get that it's a news anchor because she's looking at us and she's basically speaking as a news anchor does. And if we're not quite sure that she's a news anchor, Miller gets it across in this here with this shot, so that we have the wanted poster of Harvey Dent, who's gone missing, behind the newscaster. Very well done. It's important that this newscaster, these two images come close enough that you get it's the same person. And then we go to this guy who looks like Adolf Hitler, but he's not. He's actually Harvey Dent's psychiatrist. And in a close-up, we're going to get a interview with him. And if you've ever watched the CNN News Report or Meet the Press or anything like that, you get that this actually does play this way. So Miller also uses a nice effect of putting the word balloons, just or in this case no balloons, but putting the words up above the TV images with no panels to delineate or no word balloons to delineate that these are actually spoken word balloons. He assumes the reader will get it. I think that's a nice flow. Now from this panel we go to here. Now it goes that of Dr. Bartholomew Walper, Dent's psychiatrist, ... We see his face, and then, so what do you think? I think it's too damn hot, and I think he should see it or fold. As a reader, we're kind of wondering, what are you talking about? Is that the psychiatrist saying that? We change scene. We call that in comics a non-sequitorial change, because these two don't seem like they go together, from the doctor to the room. Now, we'll get into that a little bit further, but this is a great room. The fact that it has an old-style fan, it's got the old window blinds. This looks like an old, dusty, kind of dirty, not deluxe hotel room by any means. So this dialogue here delivered, again, VO, voice off screen, carries us into this one. And we see the TV screen, and we see the doctor on the screen, and he actually answers the question. Gordon's reaction is one of textbook hysteria. Well, we get it now. That wasn't the doctor talking here. That was these two characters that we're not going to see in this sequence, and we don't need to see them. But this is nicely done because we're not framing the shot with the TV. The TV is off to the side. The light switch or the doorknob is off to the side. It doesn't matter. We just get that it's an old room. We don't need to know any other details in that. The dialogue and the pictures work perfectly together. As we move into this one, which again flows, we find that we're actually engaged in a card game with these characters. Now, just the fact that there are cards on the table, there's a stack of money, and there's a gun with bullets, tells us these are probably not fine, upstanding church folk out for a night of fun. These are probably some bad guys, and it's really nicely done this way. There's no reason to show their faces, and that's really risky and really, really clever, because it's not needed. It gets it across. It gets across that these are some bad men playing cards while this TV screen is showing us this escape of Harvey Dent. And when Miller does show the TV talking in these scenes, he does use a balloon with the electric pointer, and that's regarded as an electronic sounding voice, a tinny voice when it has the pointer that's jagged. All right, so that's a nice flow. And they're talking about the card game, the TV's on in the background. Nicely done. Now, with action, when we go into panels, we can sometimes try to put too much action in a panel. Now, this one, also done by Bruce Timm, is sort of a comedic take of that. This was actually designed to be everything you can't show in a 90s Warner Brothers cartoon based on the division of standards. Can't have nudity, can't have smoking, can't have alcohol, can't have drugs, can't have any actual guns, can't have any violence where someone's actually hurt, you can't have kids in peril. But it's a nice example, too, of trying to show too many things in one panel. This would be fine if you're doing a humorous thing, if you're doing a comedic project, but if you're doing something serious, too many actions in a single panel makes it ridiculous. So how do you have a lot of actions in a single panel? Well, you do it this way. This is from Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics, a terrific book. I highly recommend it. It's on the suggested reading list. If you look at this, this is actually one single panel, but he broke it in to 5 panels. And that does it so that the reader actually has a break. If you can picture this without the panel borders, it's a lot of information coming at you. And this way here, it comfortably feeds you from element to element, and it flows it together. So one panel becomes 5, and we, as a reader, get a sense of pacing and how the dialogue is delivered. If we remove those panel borders, we get the impression that this is just a chaotic jumble of words going by us, and probably we're not going to read all those words. This way here, we ensure that the reader does. Different types of transitions between panels, we're going to go through that next. This one, because panels convey information, this one is known as moment to moment. So you can see in this first set, she's just looking ahead and she blinks. Can't get much more of a moment than that. On this one we have a planet and we get closer and closer still, moment to moment, panel to panel flow. This one, person sleeping, spider crawling up the bed. So moment to moment transitions are probably the most basic of all the comics that we've seen in terms of comic storytelling. Moment to moment. If we go back to Miller, we see these are essentially moment to moment. So we have Bruce, Alfred speaks more. What are we looking at? Silent panel, which is nice. Reaction, reaction, reaction. So that would all be an example of moment to moment transitions. All right, so that's the end of part 1. I'll cover more in part 2. Thanks.